My name is Rowan Hale, and on the morning of October 14th, I drove into the Appalachian foothills to spend a single day and one night in a rental cabin that came with a written list of rules I was told to follow without exception. I counted roughly 27 words in my formal introduction, which I suppose is fitting considering how official this whole thing was meant to feel. The drive-in wasn't dramatic, just long and winding, the kind of mountain road that makes your GPS sound confused even when it's technically right. I had booked the cabin a month earlier, craving quiet more than anything. Work, family, the usual cracks in the foundation of ordinary life. I needed a day where the only thing I had to listen to was wind in the trees. I didn't expect the trees to feel like they were listening back. The cabin sat a little higher than the gravel road, perched on a shallow ridge with a short set of steps leading up to the porch. It didn't look eerie or decrepit. It looked clean, recently restored, wood sealed and stained, windows polished enough to show a clear reflection. There was nothing outwardly wrong with it. If anything, the place looked nicer than the listing photos. That should have been my first warning. The key was left in a small metal lockbox screwed into the porch beam. Inside, right beside the key, was a folded sheet of paper sealed inside a clear plastic bag. I assumed it was an inventory list or some check-in instructions. I didn't open it until I got inside. The cabin's interior was simple, one main room with a bed on one side, a kitchenette on the other, a compact bathroom tucked into the back, and a cast iron wood stove by the window. Everything smelled of pine and lemon oil. Sunlight ran across the floorboards like someone had polished them minutes ago. I tossed my duffel on the bed and finally opened the bag. At the top of the page, in bold print, "Cabin rules. Please read and comply." These rules are not optional. Beneath the header, the rules were typed neatly. No handwriting. No smudges. No jokes hidden in parentheses. Just short, clipped directives. Do not acknowledge anyone you see on the property. You are the sole registered occupant that if you hear knocking from inside the walls, turn on all lights and wait 10 minutes. Do not go outside after sunset for any reason. That if you hear someone calling your name from the tree line, remain still. Do not respond. If someone knocks on the door between 1 a.m. and 1:03 a.m., do not answer. Do not speak. Do not move. At sunrise, leave promptly. Do not linger and do not look back. There were more, 2 full paragraphs of disclaimers about wildlife, property boundaries, emergency numbers, but the 6 rules were the ones that hit like cold water down the spine. The kind of rules a nervous host might write if they wanted to scare off city tourists, or the kind of rules someone writes when they've seen something they can't explain and don't want to. I read them twice, then a third time. The rational voice in my head told me these were just atmospheric nonsense, maybe part of some curated rustic experience. People love gimmicks. Haunted Airbnb, cursed wood-themed cabin, whatever gets clicks. But something in the phrasing felt too plain, too functional, to be part of a marketing ploy. No theatrical wording. No attempt at creepiness. Just instructions. Very direct ones. Still, I shrugged it off. I was here for one day. If the owner wanted me to follow their weird rules, fine. I had no intention of testing whatever mountain folklore boundaries they believed in. I unpacked, checked my phone, no service, of course, and tried the cabin's short-range Wi-Fi hotspot. It connected, but slowly, just enough to load a weather forecast. Clear skies until nightfall, then a cold front rolling in. Nothing dramatic. For the first 2 hours, everything was almost boring. I walked the short trail behind the cabin, maybe half a mile through scattered pines, damp earth, and the faint smell of wood smoke drifting from somewhere far off. The forest felt normal, quiet, if anything, unusually still for the Appalachians, where every bird and insect usually fights for airspace. But I told myself it was just the season. I returned to the cabin around noon, made coffee, and let myself sink into the peacefulness. The rules were simply folded on the table, easy to ignore. Then, at approximately 12:47 p.m., I heard the first knock. It came from the left-hand wall, near the bed frame. A short, hollow rap, just once. Not like someone banging to get my attention. More like the sound a house makes settling. Except it was too precise. Too intentional. I froze halfway through pouring sugar into my mug. The rule flashed through my mind immediately. If you hear knocking from inside the walls, turn on all lights and wait 10 minutes. I wasn't sure if one knock counted. Maybe someone had left a note in the walls or the wood had a loose beam. It didn't matter. My body reacted before my brain did. I flipped on every light switch I could find. The cabin brightened with soft yellow bulbs, the shadows lifting in a way that made the whole space feel smaller instead of safer. The second knock came 30 seconds later. Same place. Same strength. A deliberate echo of the first. My heartbeat started hitching up into my throat. 10 minutes suddenly sounded like an eternity. I sat on the edge of the bed, lights blazing, and stared at the wall. The knocks didn't continue. The silence after them was somehow worse, like the wall itself was waiting for me to do something wrong. At the 7-minute mark, I considered checking outside, just to reassure myself no one had circled the cabin. But then rule number 3 burned into my mind. Do not go outside after sunset for any reason. It wasn't sunset yet, but the idea of stepping outside with those knocks still fresh felt like playing chicken with the unknown. When 10 minutes finally passed, the stillness in the cabin felt heavier but no longer targeted at me. Like air settling after a brief disturbance. I told myself it was nothing. Just creaking wood. A bird tapping on the siding. Anything but what it felt like. I didn't know then that the knocks were just the beginning. The quiet held longer than I expected, stretching thin over the cabin like a film. I didn't move for several minutes after the 10-minute mark passed. Something about the stillness felt watchful, like if I shifted too quickly, whatever had caused those knocks would return to remind me who was really in control out here. Eventually, I made myself stand, more out of embarrassment than courage. This was a rental cabin, not a haunted mine shaft. Realistically, a squirrel could have gotten trapped in the crawl space. A loose branch could have knocked against the siding. I repeated that to myself until the tension in my shoulders eased a little. It wasn't until I reached for my mug again that I noticed something off. Something small, but sharp enough to pick at the back of my mind. When I set the mug down earlier, I'd placed it on the right side of the table, handle facing outward. Now it was sitting more toward the center, maybe an inch or two over. Not dramatically moved, but shifted just enough that my brain flagged it, like a barely visible difference in a spot the difference puzzle. I stared at it too long, trying to retrace my own movements. Had I bumped the table? Set it down wrong? Distracted myself and forgotten? All possible. All reasonable. It was the more comforting explanation, so I clung to it. I spent the next couple of hours trying to keep things normal. I swept out some pine needles tracked in from the trail, cracked a window for fresh air, and heated a simple lunch on the small stovetop. Sunshine had shifted to a warmer, later afternoon slant, casting long beams through the trees outside. Nothing felt wrong. Until 3:16 p.m. I heard footsteps outside. They were light, slow, like someone walking over damp earth and loose gravel. The sound wasn't loud, but out here, where the nearest neighbor might have been 2 miles away, it hit hard. Instinct made me step toward the front window before I remembered the first rule. Do not acknowledge anyone you see on the property. You are the sole registered occupant. I paused with my fingers inches from the curtain. If I looked outside and saw someone, by definition, I'd be acknowledging them. But ignoring footsteps outside felt like pretending not to smell smoke in a burning room. The footsteps moved closer, soft but purposeful, circling around the side of the cabin. I backed away slowly, letting my hand drop. Whoever was out there wasn't rushing, not calling out, not approaching the door, just walking around the structure with a steady pace. I held my breath when the footsteps reached the bedroom window, barely 6 feet from where I stood. The shadow of a figure, tall, maybe average build, moved past the glass. The curtains were drawn, so I didn't see details, just a dark silhouette sliding across the fabric. No pause, no attempt to look inside. Then the footsteps continued toward the back of the cabin, growing softer until they disappeared entirely. I waited. 1 minute. Nothing. I looked down at my phone again. Still no service, which for the first time felt less like mountain inconvenience and more like calculated isolation. The cabin's Wi-Fi blinked a weak amber signal on the small router, meaning it had lost connection too. That didn't feel like coincidence. I paced the cabin until the adrenaline burned down enough for rational thoughts to creep in. Maybe it was a hiker who'd gotten lost, or a ranger checking trails, or the property owner stopping by. But the rules specifically stated I was the sole registered occupant, and whoever it was hadn't knocked, hadn't called out, just walked the perimeter like they were inspecting something, or someone. At 4:02 p.m., as if the day hadn't thrown enough at me already, the cabin lights flickered. Just twice. A quick dim and brighten, like a power surge. The rule about loud knocks didn't apply here, and there was no mention of electrical issues. I checked the breaker box anyway. Everything looked normal. Still, the sun was starting to dip behind the ridge, taking its warmth and reassurance with it. I knew once that happened, Rule 3 would come into effect. Do not go outside after sunset for any reason. It was tempting to just leave then, while the sky still held light. Grab my bag, get in the car, bounce over the gravel road until I reached town. But I hesitated. Leaving early felt like admitting fear, like letting whatever was creeping around the cabin decide my actions. And the owner's rules for sunrise departure nagged at me more than they should have. Why sunrise specifically? Why not just say, check out by 10 a.m.? The phrasing bothered me. Enough that I found myself deciding to wait until morning despite how much I didn't want to. By 5:27 p.m., the temperature had dropped sharply. A cold wind pressed against the cabin walls, carrying the scent of wet soil and decomposing leaves. Dusk in the Appalachians hits fast. 1 minute the sky is gold, the next it's bruised purple and swallowing everything beneath it. I stood at the window, watching the last scrap of sun vanish behind the tree-line. That was when I heard it. My name. So distant. Drawn out from the woods like someone hollowing my name out syllable by syllable. Rowan. I locked up instantly. Every muscle in my body pulled tight. I stepped away from the window like it had snapped at me. The voice came again, threaded through the trees, identical in pitch to someone trying too hard to sound familiar. Not close. Maybe 20 yards out. But not far enough. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. Rule number 4 floated through my head like it had been waiting for this moment. If you hear someone calling your name from the tree-line, remain still. Do not respond. So I stood there, a statue with a pumping heart, listening to something in the forest calling me like it knew me, like it had practiced. Rowan. The voice didn't come closer. It didn't retreat. It just hovered at that same impossible distance, like whoever, whatever, was saying it didn't need to move to be heard. It took nearly 5 minutes for the woods to fall silent again. Even after the voice stopped, I didn't move until the dark fully settled around the cabin and the last faint outline of the ridge disappeared from the window. Only then did I truly understand how long the night ahead would be. The cabin felt smaller once the last threads of twilight disappeared. Darkness in the Appalachians hits differently, thicker, heavier, the kind that presses against windows like a living thing. I turned on every light again, partially because of the earlier rule about the knocks, partially because bright spaces feel safer even when they're not. I kept expecting the voice to return. My name, stretched thin and wrong, echoing through the woods like a lure. But after that final fading call, the forest fell unbelievably silent. No insects, no distant owls, no wind shaking the branches. Just the layered hum of cabin electricity and my own breath growing too loud in my ears. I retreated to the center of the room, away from windows and doors. The rules weren't long, but they were deliberate, and now they felt like barricades rather than guidelines. I found myself checking them again, my hands shaking just enough to blur the lines. I paused at the one that haunted me most. Do not go outside after sunset for any reason. There was no ambiguity, no wiggle room. Whoever wrote it expected someone to panic, to run, to choose the woods over the cabin. And they wanted to stop that instinct cold. That scared me more than anything I'd heard so far. I sat at the small kitchen table, rules in front of me like a contract I hadn't wanted to sign. The wood stove clicked softly as it cooled, each sound making the hair on my arms stand on end. I tried listening for footsteps again, for the voice, for anything that might tell me where the danger actually was. Nothing came. Until 7:41 p.m. The first knock wasn't from the wall. It was from the door. Just a single, soft tap, like a fingertip brushing wood. Not the assertive knock of someone demanding attention. Something exploratory. Testing. I froze halfway out of my chair. The rules didn't mention knocks before 1 a.m. They only specified the window between 1 o'clock and 1:03, which meant this fell outside any clear instruction. But everything in me screamed that opening the door was the worst possible choice. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I didn't breathe. The second knock was slightly louder, almost curious. Not aggressive. Not human in the way humans usually announce themselves. It reminded me of how a child might poke a new toy, testing how it responds. A third knock followed, this one slower, more measured. Every instinct I had screamed that someone stood on the porch, inches from where I sat. The air in the cabin shifted around me, thick with expectation. I felt watched, but not through the windows. Through the door itself. Like something leaned in close, waiting to see if I'd break the rule by default, out of fear. I backed away one step, then another until I reached the opposite wall. The door stayed silent for a long moment. Long enough that I started wondering if I'd imagined it. Then the doorknob turned. Just a small movement. A testing rattle. Not enough to open it, but enough to make my stomach drop. I remembered locking it earlier. I distinctly remembered turning the deadbolt. Still, I stared at the knob as it shifted by millimeters, as if someone outside moved it simply because they could. It stopped abruptly, like whoever was on the porch lost interest. Footsteps followed, but not heavy ones. These were light, almost skipping, crossing the wooden boards with an unsettling rhythm. They circled the porch once, then drifted away, fading into the dirt and leaves until I couldn't tell if they stopped or simply moved beyond hearing range. For the second time that day, the silence felt alive. I exhaled slowly, only realizing then how shallow I'd been breathing. My hands were cold from gripping the back of the chair. I forced myself to move back to the center of the room, shut the curtains tighter, double-check the door, then check it again. The deadbolt was still locked. That should have reassured me. It didn't. From then until around 10 p.m., the cabin remained quiet. Too quiet, like the woods were holding their breath with me. I kept all the lights on, every bulb chasing away corners that felt too dark. I tried reading to distract myself but couldn't focus on a single sentence. My mind kept replaying the voice calling my name, the doorknob turning, the shadow earlier at the window. Just before 10, I noticed something small but deeply wrong. My duffel bag, which I had placed on the bed earlier, now sat on the floor. I hadn't moved it. There was no reason it would have shifted on its own. The bed was level. The bag wasn't top-heavy. It hadn't fallen, it had been placed there. Upright, neatly positioned, like someone had moved it with purpose. I stared at it for a long time, fighting the instinct to tiptoe across the cabin. But fear has a strange way of numbing caution. I approached it slowly, each step feeling like it pressed through molasses. When I reached the bag, I opened it. Everything inside was rearranged. Clothes folded differently. Toiletries on the opposite side. My phone charger coiled too neatly to be mine. It felt like someone had gone through every item, not with urgency or searching intent, but with curiosity. Like a raccoon turning over new objects, except this wasn't an animal. The arrangement was too deliberate. Even more unsettling, my car keys now lay on top of my clothes. I knew I'd placed them on the bedside table earlier. They were the last thing I touched before making coffee. Someone, or something, had moved them inside my bag. That realization hit harder than any knock or voice. It meant whoever had walked the porch, whoever had stood on the other side of the door, they'd been inside the cabin at some point. And I hadn't heard a thing. I stepped back slowly, heart pounding, eyes sweeping the room as if expecting a shape to slide out from behind the stove or closet. Nothing appeared, but the walls felt thinner, the air colder. Then my eyes dropped to the printed rules again. Rule number 2 echoed through my head with new weight. If you hear knocking from inside the walls, turn on all lights and wait 10 minutes. I had followed that earlier, but now something else hit me with sudden clarity. The knocks hadn't come from inside the walls. They'd come from inside the cabin. I hadn't turned the lights on because of some rule. I'd turned them on because something wanted me to. And night had only just begun. The realization sat on my chest like weight, ugly, heavy, undeniable. Someone had been inside the cabin. Not outside. Not knocking from the walls. Inside. Moving through the space with enough confidence to rearrange my belongings without making a sound. I stepped back from the duffel bag until my knees hit the mattress. The lights hummed overhead, too gentle for a room that suddenly felt like a sealed trap. I wanted to tell myself I had misremembered things, that maybe I'd moved the bag without thinking, but the neatness, the intentionality, those things weren't mine. Whoever had done it had handled my clothes the way you'd inspect artifacts, not the way a thief rummages for valuables. The silence swallowed that thought whole. At 10:27 p.m., something scraped lightly against the floorboards beneath the cabin. Not footsteps. Not claws. A dragging sound. Slow, deliberate, as if something moved around under the structure, tracing the underside like it was mapping where I stood. The cabin didn't have a basement. Just a low crawl space, barely tall enough for a person to slither through. The sound followed the perimeter beneath me, stopping every few seconds, then continuing. I stood still, eyes fixed on the floor like I expected it to bow inward. I didn't dare step closer to any wall. The rules hadn't warned about noises under the cabin, only inside the walls. But this was worse. This meant someone could be lying flat under a floorboard, inches beneath my feet. The scraping paused directly under my position by the bed. For a moment, everything stopped. Even the lights felt like they dimmed. Then came a soft exhale from under the floor. I shot backward, nearly knocking over the table. My breath shook like I'd sprinted a mile. Something down there was breathing hard enough for me to hear it through sealed floorboards. Slow, steady breaths, each one pushing dust up through invisible cracks. The worst part wasn't the sound. It was the rhythm. It matched my breathing. Whoever, or whatever, was beneath the cabin was imitating me. I clamped a hand over my mouth instinctively, and the breathing under the floor stopped, as if listening. My pulse thudded in my ears. I lowered myself slowly until I could hear better. Dust floated in the beam of the overhead light, swirling like the air under the floor had been disturbed recently. A sudden tap sounded from beneath the bed. Not from the underside of the cabin, but from the underside of the mattress. I jerked backwards so fast I slid on the floor. My knee hit the wall, sending pain up my leg, but I didn't stop moving until I reached the opposite side of the room. Something was under the bed. Something inside the cabin. The rules didn't prepare me for this. At 11:06 p.m., the scratching under the house faded. The breathing did too. Silence bled back into the room, slow and thick. I didn't trust it. I couldn't. I stayed standing, pressed against the far wall, scanning every inch of the cabin like it was a minefield. My duffel bag. The door. The windows. The shadows behind the stove. The narrow crack beneath the bed where darkness seemed to ripple slightly, like it was adjusting. The next hours stretched into something unbearable. I watched the digital clock on the kitchenette stove tick toward midnight. 12:14, 12:22, 12:39. Not a single noise came from outside, beneath, or inside the cabin. Too quiet again. I didn't dare turn off the lights. Every bulb burned hot, the room starting to feel feverish with heat and fear. My heartbeat thudded in my palms. I knew 1 a.m. was coming, and the rules warned me specifically about that time. If someone knocks on the door between 1 a.m. and 1:03 a.m., do not answer. Do not speak. Do not move. A warning so specific it had to be based on something real. At 12:58 the cabin creaked. Just once. So, like a subtle adjustment of weight on the porch boards outside. My breath froze. I didn't move. Not even to blink properly. 12:59. The air in the room thickened so suddenly my ears popped. Pressure shifted like a storm front pressing down on the cabin, though the sky outside had been clear hours earlier. The clock clicked to 1 a.m. Knock. It wasn't loud. It wasn't human. It was like someone pressed their forehead against the door, then leaned their full weight into a single heavy tap. I didn't move. Knock. A little softer this time, almost testing. Like whatever was out there was adjusting how much force to use. Knock. Slow. Measured. Almost patient. I didn't breathe. At 1:01 a.m., the knocks changed rhythm. Faster now, but quieter. Like fingertips dancing along the wood. Touching. Tapping. Searching for weak points. A faint voice came next. Rowan. Not from the woods this time. From the other side of the door. Close enough that the syllables vibrated against the frame. The voice was wrong, too flat, too steady. Like someone who'd practiced saying my name was trying it again with better volume, better pacing, better mimicry. My muscles screamed to run, to hide, to do anything but stay perfectly still. The voice shifted slightly, dropping into a lower pitch. Row 1, open. A request. A command. A test. I didn't move. Not an inch. Knock. This one hit with a dull thud, shaking dust from the nearby beam. I nearly flinched. The door visibly trembled. A shadow appeared beneath the gap, clear, human-shaped feet. But motionless. My lungs burned from holding my breath. My eyes watered. The lights buzzed above me, the only sound in the room other than the soft rasp of something breathing on the other side of the door. Then, nothing. The shadow under the door remained for several agonizing seconds, perfectly still, as if whoever stood there was waiting for the slightest movement. At 1:03 a.m. exactly, the shadow pulled away. No footsteps. No retreating shape. Not even the sound of leaves shifting outside. Just absence. The rules hadn't explained what would happen if I moved. What would happen if I made a sound? What would happen if I opened the door? But the silence after 1:03 told me I had done the only right thing. Still, I stayed frozen long after. Because something in that silence felt unfinished. Something had come to my door. But I wasn't convinced it had left. Not yet. I didn't move for several minutes after 1:03 a.m. passed. My muscles felt locked, cemented by adrenaline. I kept staring at the bottom of the door, waiting for another shadow to return, waiting for fingertips or a face or anything to press against the wood. Nothing did. But the absence didn't feel safe. It felt strategic. Eventually, when the ache in my lungs turned to sharp pain, I forced myself to breathe again. Quietly. Slowly. I had no idea if sound mattered, but something about the way that thing, person, whatever it was whispered my name made me instinctively keep silent, like noise might draw it back. At 1:11 a.m., the cabin made a soft cracking noise, like weight shifting on one of the outer beams. My entire body tensed again. No knock followed. No voice. Just that quiet creak. The kind houses make on their own, except this one felt timed, like someone putting a foot down very carefully on the porch. I edged away from the front door, every instinct urging me deeper into the cabin. I didn't want to be near any wall. That left only the middle of the room, next to the kitchenette where the lights were brightest. I pulled one of the chairs with me, sat facing the door, and fixed my eyes on it. My mind replayed the moment the voice called my name from the woods, then again from the doorstep, each syllable stretched into something not quite human. Silence filled the next half hour. It wasn't peaceful silence. It was thick and unnatural, the kind that makes your heart beat the loudest thing in the world. I kept scanning the windows even though the curtains were shut. Every once in a while, a light breeze pushed against the porch roof outside, making the beams creak softly. Each time it happened, I jumped, expecting the voice or the footsteps or the tapping to return. It didn't, but something else did. At 1:46 a.m., the floorboards under the bed shifted again. The sound wasn't like earlier. It wasn't breathing or tapping or movement against the underside. It was weight. Actual weight settling onto the wood, as if someone, something, had crawled out from the crawl space and was now sitting directly beneath the bed frame. My throat tightened so hard it hurt. The bed sat no more than 8 feet from me. I could picture it too vividly, some shape curled beneath the mattress, pressed against the slats, listening to me breathe. I didn't dare look at it. Even turning my head felt like a wrong move. A faint pressure slid across the wood, like a single finger dragging slowly from one side of the bed to the other. Then another drag. And another. Whatever was under there wasn't trying to hide. It was exploring again, curious, patient, feeling the contours of the room from the shadows. The dragging stopped exactly at the edge closest to me. A soft tap followed. Just one. A single fingertip pressing upward on the wooden floorboard, like it was trying to get my attention. I pressed my heels into the floor to push myself back slightly, but the chair legs scraped louder than I wanted. Instantly, the tap under the bed paused. I held my breath again. 5 seconds. 10 seconds. 15. Then, extremely slowly, I heard a shifting sound, something turning its body, realigning beneath the bed, like it was positioning itself to face the direction of my movement. I felt my pulse pounding in my throat. I didn't have a weapon. I didn't have service. I had 4 thin walls and a locked door that hadn't kept anything out earlier. At 2:03 a.m., the house went dead silent again. The thing under the bed stopped moving entirely. The cabin's electricity flickered once, just once, but enough to send a jolt straight through my ribs. I tightened my grip on the chair, waiting for the lights to die, half expecting darkness to swallow the room and leave me with nothing but the sound of breathing beneath the mattress. But the lights steadied. Another 5 minutes passed without any sound at all. Slowly, steadily, the quiet became too long, too intentional. The absence of noise felt like preparation, like something holding its breath, waiting. At 2:17 a.m., the cabin's back window creaked. Just a small shift, like someone brushing their hand against the frame from the outside. Then the same sound at the front window. Then the side window. A perimeter sweep. My stomach twisted painfully. Someone was walking the entire exterior again. Slowly, quietly. They weren't knocking this time. They weren't testing the door. They were checking the windows as if marking each one. I didn't dare stand. I didn't dare speak. I grabbed the chair arms hard enough to numb my fingers. The footsteps traveled around the cabin again. One window at a time. A soft pause. Then movement to the next. When they reached the last window, the one next to the stove, the cabin lights flickered again. Harder this time. The bulb overhead buzzed loudly, then steadied but dimmed slightly. A soft exhale came from outside the stove window. Not a breath in frustration. Not exhaustion. The kind of breath someone lets out when they've found what they were looking for. The window pane shifted, like fingertips trailing along the glass. I squeezed my eyes shut. Just for a second. When I opened them again, the lights were too bright, reflecting off the window, hiding whatever stood outside. But I could make out a faint silhouette through the curtain. A head shape. Shoulders. Motionless. Staring in. My entire body shook as quietly as possible behind the chair. I didn't blink. I didn't breathe loudly enough to make sound. I didn't dare break the rule, not by acknowledging, not by reacting. After nearly a full minute, the silhouette shifted, then drifted away from the window, step by slow step, until the porch boards creaked again under the weight of something tall. Then the footsteps stopped completely. Not walking away. Not approaching the door. Just stopping. Waiting. At 2:41 a.m., the floor beneath the bed creaked again. But this time, it wasn't a shift. It was weight lifting. Something crawling out. Not fast. Not aggressive. Slow. Deliberate. As though the thing outside and the thing inside had finally communicated and decided their next move. The sound of weight lifting from under the bed was quiet, too quiet for something that had pressed the floorboards earlier with enough pressure to leave dust drifting into the air. But the shift was unmistakable. Wood gave a faint groan, followed by a slow drag, like fabric or skin brushing against wooden slats. My entire body locked. I didn't dare breathe, didn't dare blink. The chair beneath me felt suddenly loud, its legs threatening to creak if I so much as twitched. Another dragging sound followed. Something shifting its limbs. Something rearranging itself in the narrow space. The worst part was how controlled it sounded. Not frantic. Not confused. Like whatever was beneath the bed knew exactly what it was doing. And exactly how quietly it wanted to do it. At 2:42 a.m., a soft thump landed against the underside of the mattress. Not accidental. Not clumsy. A deliberate press upward. My heartbeat slammed so hard against my ribs I felt dizzy. I pressed my back into the wall, bracing for anything, any kind of movement, any shape emerging from the shadows. And then I heard it. A breath. This time it didn't mimic mine. It didn't copy my cadence or inhale after I exhaled. It breathed steady, low, like someone crouched under the bed was calming themselves. Preparing. The dragging sound continued. Slow. Methodical. Something was turning, angling its body toward the side of the bed that faced the room. The side that faced me. I wanted to run. Every instinct in my body screamed to bolt for the door, break the rule, sprint into the woods until I collapsed. But the image of that silhouette outside the window, patient, unmoving, pinned me in place. If something was crawling out under the bed, and something else had been outside moments before, I couldn't risk choosing which side of the danger was worse. The floorboard beneath the frame creaked again, and I saw it. Movement. A hand. It slid into view from the gap under the bed, fingers long, pale, too slender to belong to any adult I'd ever met, but too large to be a child's. The skin looked soft, almost clean, except for streaks of dark soil embedded in the creases, as though it had crawled through mud hours earlier. The hand paused just beyond the edge of the bed, palm down, fingertips pressing lightly into the floorboards. Testing. Feeling. My breath snagged in my throat. The hand lifted slightly, like it was feeling the air. Then another hand followed, emerging slowly, soundlessly, placing itself beside the first. If it had moved quickly or jerkily, I might have screamed out of pure shock. But the controlled precision was worse. It wasn't guessing or fumbling. It was confident, familiar with crawling out of tight spaces, familiar with cabins like this, familiar with people frozen just like me. The hands pressed into the floor. Something began pulling itself forward. For a moment, only darkness filled the space beneath the bed. Then a face began to emerge. Not fully, just enough for me to see the outline of a forehead, a strip of hair so dark it absorbed the light, and eyes reflecting the overhead bulbs like faint glass. Unblinking, focused directly on me. I didn't realize I'd stopped breathing until my vision spotted. I blinked rapidly, trying not to faint, trying not to make noise. The thing didn't blink back. It didn't speak. It just stared, its head still half hidden beneath the frame, as though it was deciding whether to fully reveal itself. A footstep hit the porch outside. The thing under the bed froze instantly, its fingers tightening slightly on the boards. The eyes narrowed, not at me, but toward the front door as if listening. Another footstep, heavy, deliberate, directly over the front beam. The thing under the bed didn't retreat. It didn't advance. It simply stayed perfectly still, like whatever was outside was something it feared or respected. For the first time in hours, some other presence felt larger, more dangerous, more in control. A knock followed. Not the soft tapping from before. This was heavier. A full-fisted strike. Twice. 3 times. Not during the 1 to 103 window. This was outside the rules. My blood turned to ice. The thing under the bed slowly pulled its hands back into the shadows, its eyes shrinking into darkness until only faint gleams remained. It didn't crawl back entirely. It didn't leave. It hid. From whatever stood outside. The porch creaked under shifting weight. The knock came again, louder this time, like something growing impatient. My breath felt razor-sharp in my throat. Then, something unexpected. A voice. But not the voice from before. Not the stretched-out mimicry that whispered my name from the treeline. This voice was deeper, firmer, human but aged, like someone whose vocal cords had weathered decades of mountain air. Rowan Hale. I flinched as if the voice had struck me. The thing under the bed tensed, the shadow of its shoulders pulling tighter. The voice outside continued, tone leveled, not calling out in distress or aggression, just speaking. You need to leave at sunrise. And you must go alone. The words weren't comforting. They were instructions. Orders. Something thudded lightly against the door from outside. An object dropped directly onto the porch boards. Then footsteps retreated, not down the steps, but off to the side, brushing against branches, moving into the woods without hesitation. Within seconds, the presence was gone. Total silence returned, except for the faintest whisper of breathing from beneath the bed. So, waiting for sunrise. Waiting for me. I didn't sleep. Not even for a second. I stayed seated in that chair, muscles stiff, eyes burning, watching the bed frame in case those pale hands appeared again. The hours dragged. 3 o'clock, 3:40. For 10, my head swam with exhaustion, but fear welded me awake. Outside, the sky didn't lighten yet. Morning in the mountains always comes late. The thing beneath the bed didn't move for a long time. But at 5:32 a.m., it began crawling forward again. Slow, silent, purposeful, because sunrise was coming, and it wasn't done with me yet. The sound of it crawling forward was worse than any knock, any voice, any silhouette at the window. Slow drags, soft shifts, would groaning in tiny increments under distributed weight. The kind of movements an animal might make, but this wasn't an animal. The hands I'd seen were too human, too deliberate. Whatever it was, it knew how to move without making noise, and the only reason I heard anything at all was because it wasn't trying to hide anymore. The faintest gray outline began to form at the bottom of the curtains. Sunrise wasn't here yet, but it was close. Close enough that the cabin seemed to sense it, the air shifting, the woods outside breathing differently. A strange, thin light touched the tops of the trees outside, barely visible, but I felt the change more than I saw it. The crawling stopped. It froze halfway out, hands flat on the floorboards, forearms tense, the head still low enough that I couldn't see its full face. Just a pale strip of cheekbone and the edge of dark hair. The eyes were still hidden beneath the bed's shadow, but I could feel them. Focused. Intent. I didn't move. Every part of me was locked in place, braced for whatever came next. Then, in the faint light, its hand lifted. It didn't swipe or grab. The fingers unfolded slowly, like someone opening a palm to show they weren't a threat. Except it didn't feel like reassurance. It felt like ritual. Like this was part of something it had done before. Many times. The hand hovered in the air, almost reaching toward me. Not a demand. Not aggression. Something stranger. A quiet invitation, as if it wanted me to take it. I backed the chair a single inch. A tiny, involuntary motion. The wood creaked under my weight, and the thing reacted instantly. Its hands snapped down to the floor. Its entire body went utterly still. The shift was so fast and so unnatural that it sent a cold shock through me. It had responded to sound. That much was clear now. Silence stretched on for 30 seconds, maybe longer, turning into something taut and unbearable. I could feel the gray light outside strengthening. The faint glow behind the curtains brightened enough to show the outline of dust floating in the air. Sunrise. It was close. So close that time felt thinner, like the night was slinking backward while the day pressed forward. The room didn't feel safer yet, but the edges of fear sharp enough to cut through reality began softening. The rules had told me to leave at sunrise, and now I understood why. Whatever roamed the property seemed steeped in darkness, whether by nature or preference. And whatever was under the bed wasn't retreating, not yet. But it was waiting, anticipating. The hand slowly curled again, then flattened. It shifted forward by inches, dragging its elbow lightly along the floor. My breath caught. I thought it would pull itself fully into the room. Instead, it stopped. The head tilted slightly, as if listening. Then I heard what it heard. Footsteps outside. Returning. Heavy this time, not tentative. They approached from the right side of the cabin, boots crushing fallen leaves, pacing toward the porch with steady determination. Each step seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. The thing under the bed pulled its hand back instantly. Not with fear. With respect. That word kept sinking into my mind even though I hated thinking it. Respect. As if the presence outside outranked it. As if there was an order to things here, and dawn pulled something to the front of that hierarchy. A soft thump landed onto the porch again. The same spot where something had been left earlier. Then came the voice. The same older voice. Harder this time. More urgent. Rowan. When the light reaches the floorboards, you leave. Not before. Not after. I didn't speak. I couldn't. The footsteps did not retreat immediately. Instead, they paced once across the boards. Slowly, testing weight, as though ensuring something stayed beneath the bed and did not interfere with the instructions. Only after another long moment did the footsteps move away from the cabin. Branches shifted. Leaves cracked. The presence faded back into the tree line. The The thing under the bed still didn't move. But this time, it didn't feel like it was waiting for me. It was waiting for the sun. The gray light swelled slowly, pushing through the curtains, turning the cabin faintly silver. The wood grain of the floor brightened. The edges of the furniture sharpened in the rising glow. I stood, slowly, carefully, every motion measured so the chair wouldn't scrape. The thing beneath the bed shifted in response. Not forward, not aggressive, but attentive. Where? I edged sideways toward the door, one step at a time, my eyes never leaving the bed frame. My breath shook, but I kept it quiet. The rules hadn't told me how to leave, only that I had to. Step by step, the light crept across the floorboards, reaching toward my feet. The moment a thin blade of sunlight touched my shoe, something under the bed exhaled sharply, a sound halfway between retreat and warning. Then it slid back. Not fast, not slow. A deliberate return into the shadows, pulling its hands beneath the frame, lowering its head until only darkness remained. But right before the last inch of it disappeared, I saw its eyes. Focused. Not hateful. Not hungry. Something else. Recognition. And then it withdrew completely. The moment its shape vanished fully beneath the bed, the cabin seemed to release a breath all its own. The pressure in the air eased. The lights flickered once, then steadied. The sunlight reached the middle of the floor. I moved. I unlatched the deadbolt. My hands shook too much to turn it cleanly the first time. The wood felt warm under my palm. I opened the door slowly, bracing for something to be standing there. Nothing was. Just the early morning chill, mist curling at the edges of the porch, and a faint trail of footprints leading away toward the tree line. I forced myself to step out onto the porch. That's when I saw what had been left for me. A small, hand-carved wooden figure. Humanoid. About as long as my palm. Its arms were carved downward, its face blank, and on the chest someone had carved a single shallow X. I didn't touch it. I didn't want to. The sun broke fully over the ridge behind me. Rule number 6 echoed as I stepped off the porch. At sunrise, leave promptly. Do not linger and do not look back. I followed that rule exactly. One step at a time down the gravel path, feeling the weight of the forest behind me. Feeling that whatever was under the bed might still be watching. Not following. Not chasing. Just watching. Because sunrise had come. And something else was now waiting for night. The gravel shifted under my shoes as I walked down the slope, each step feeling unreal, like my body moved but my mind hadn't caught up yet. The air was cold enough to sting my lungs. Morning in the Appalachians always felt a bit ancient, like the mountains woke slowly, but today the air carried something else. A hum, a vibration in the stillness, as if the woods were holding back the ending of a story not finished with me. I kept walking. The drive was only a few minutes downhill, but it felt like miles. My car sat exactly where I'd parked it the day before, tires muddy, windshield lightly dusted with dew, driver's door closed the way I'd left it. Nothing visibly disturbed, but I still checked the trunk, the back seats, under the car itself, because after what had crawled out from beneath that bed, I couldn't let myself take chances. Everything was untouched. That should have calmed me, but it didn't. If anything, it made the fear settle deeper. Some dangers didn't need to move objects to follow you. I unlocked the door, slid into the driver's seat, and shut it quickly, not slamming but not gentle either. I didn't want to draw attention. I didn't want to break any more unspoken rules the mountains seemed to have. I started the engine. The car sputtered for half a second before catching. My breath released in a shaky rush I hadn't realized I'd held. I pulled onto the gravel road and began the descent. Trees flanked both sides, thick with early morning fog. Sunlight struggled through the branches, creating thin beams that cut across the road. Whenever I passed through one, it reminded me of stepping across a boundary, one safe, one unsafe. The cabin rules said not to look back, and I didn't. Not once. Even when nerves crawled up my spine begging me to check if something followed. A few minutes into the drive, I saw something in the road ahead. A figure. My hands tightened on the wheel. My stomach plunged. But as I rolled closer, the figure resolved into something less supernatural. Just a man. Standing casually on the right side of the road, hands in the pockets of a weathered jacket, boots planted solidly in the dirt. His white beard caught the sun like frost. He looked old, maybe 70s, maybe older. But his posture wasn't frail. It was steady. I didn't want to stop. I also didn't want to speed past him and risk breaking some unknown mountain rule where ignoring the wrong person becomes a mistake you don't get to correct. As I slowed, the man lifted one hand, palm up, not waving, signaling. I rolled the window down 3 inches. Just enough to hear him. Enough to close quickly if I needed to. "You're the one from the cabin," he said. Not a question. A statement. His voice matched the one I'd heard outside the door during the night. The one that had told me to leave at sunrise. My pulse thudded painfully, but I nodded. He stepped slightly closer, not threateningly, just with the calm confidence of someone used to being obeyed in these woods. "You did well," he said. "Most don't." The cold in my blood sharpened. My voice was barely audible when I asked, "What was in there?" "Under the bed." He studied me for a moment, his eyes pale and sharp. The kind of eyes that had seen things and understood things in ways younger people didn't want to. "It isn't important what it is," he said. "What matters is that you followed the rules." "That thing wasn't the only one," I said. "I meant the figure at the window. The footsteps. The mimic voice." He didn't seem surprised. "The mountain has its own hierarchy." "Hierarchy," I repeated, trying to understand the weight of that word. He nodded once. "Some things command. Some things obey. Some things collect." The carved wooden figure flashed in my mind. The blank face, the X carved into its chest. Before I could ask about it, he spoke again. "You left it on the porch." "I didn't touch it." "Good," he said. "If you'd taken it, it would have followed you down the mountain." A cold tremor ran through my arms. "What was it?" "The figure." "A marker," he said. "For the night walkers. They mark the ones they're interested in." My throat dried. Interested in for what? He didn't answer right away. His gaze drifted to the forest behind me, as if checking for watchers. Then he leaned in closer, not enough to breach the window gap, but enough for his voice to lower. "You survived," he said. "Leave it at that. And don't come back." The words hit harder than any knock on the cabin door. I swallowed. "Are you the owner? Of the rental?" "No," he said quietly. "No one owns that cabin. Not anymore." A chill crawled down my spine. "Then, why is it listed online?" He exhaled slowly, something between resignation and fatigue. "Because some things in these mountains want strangers. Strangers are predictable. They follow instructions. They don't ask questions." My palms went cold on the steering wheel. "Go," he said, stepping back from the car. "Don't stop until you're off the ridge." I rolled the window up without another word. My hands shook as I shifted into drive. The man watched me leave, unmoving, unreadable. And as I rounded the bend, just before he disappeared from view, he lifted his hand and pointed upward. I followed the gesture instinctively. There, halfway up the ridge behind the tree line, a faint outline stood between the trees. Not moving, just standing, like the child on the ridge in those urban legends, except taller, thinner, wider in the shoulders. And I knew instantly, instinctively, it wasn't looking at the man. It was looking at me. I pressed the gas harder. The mountain road dipped, trees swallowing the view. I didn't see it again. I didn't want to. The fog thickened as I descended, like the mountain wanted one last chance to smother visibility. The forest closed in on both sides, branches leaning over the road as if eavesdropping. Every so often I glanced in the rearview mirror. I never saw anyone, but I kept imagining a figure walking steadily behind the car, matching my speed, staying just out of sight, but never far behind. I didn't feel safe until the paved road appeared. And even then the fear didn't let go. Because in the rearview mirror, for one impossible second, the fog parted just enough to show a small wooden figure tucked into the bend of the road behind me. Not the one on the porch. Another one. Identical. And facing downhill. Facing me. I nearly slammed the brakes when I saw it in the rearview mirror, that small carved figure standing upright in the bend of the road behind me, perfectly balanced, perfectly still, facing downhill like it had been placed there seconds before I looked. But I didn't stop. Stopping felt like stepping back into a rule book I no longer understood. I kept driving, eyes flicking between the road and the mirror, watching the figure shrink as the fog consumed it. When it finally disappeared from view, I felt something unclench in my chest, only to tighten again immediately, because I realized something else. I had never heard footsteps behind the car. If someone had placed it there, they moved without sound, without disruption, without hesitation, just like the thing under the bed. I didn't slow down until I reached the small gas station at the base of the ridge, a lonely place with a flickering sign and a single pump. I pulled in, cut the engine, and sat there gripping the steering wheel as if it were the last solid thing I could hold. The world felt normal again. Birds chattered in the distance. A delivery truck hummed by on the main road. Sunlight hit the pavement in warm, unthreatening patches. But my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I got out and walked inside. The bell over the door chimed, startling me even though it was the most ordinary sound imaginable. The cashier, a woman in her 50s with tired eyes, glanced up. "Morning," she said. My voice cracked. "Hey." I moved down one of the aisles, not really looking for anything, just trying to anchor myself to something that wasn't creaking floorboards and whispering voices. My legs still trembled every few steps. When I reached the counter to pay for a bottle of water I didn't remember picking up, the cashier's gaze sharpened. "You look like you saw a ghost," she said lightly, though her eyes weren't joking. I laughed once, a brittle sound. Something like that. I wanted to ask her about the cabin, about the old man, about the carved figures. But some instinct stopped me. Saying too much felt like giving something oxygen. Naming it felt like inviting it. Instead, I asked, "You get a lot of people renting cabins up there?" Her expression shifted subtly, not fear, not surprise, but recognition. "Which cabin?" I hesitated. "The one near the ridge trail." "No number. Just coordinates." Her jaw tightened. She looked down at the counter, then back up. "You stayed there?" "Just one night," I said. "You shouldn't have." Her voice was low now, not chastising but sympathetic. "Nobody maintains that listing. It keeps reappearing on rental sites. They take it down, it shows up again." "By who?" She didn't answer. Instead, she nodded toward my car. "You driving straight home?" "Yeah." "Good." She leaned in slightly. "Don't stop on shoulder roads. Don't take detours. Don't pull over unless it's daylight and you're someplace crowded." "I'm off the mountain," I said, trying to sound steadier than I felt. "I'll be fine." Her eyes softened with pity. Things follow, especially ones that take an interest. The carved figure flashed in my mind again. The one with the X carved on its chest. The identical one placed behind me on the downhill road. My stomach twisted. I wanted to ask what the X meant. But again, The instinct not to speak details aloud held me back. I paid and left. The moment I stepped back into the sunlight, the world felt thin. Like the mountain had stretched something over me, a film I couldn't wipe away. I got into the car, turned the engine, and pulled out onto the highway. Each mile I put between myself and the ridge loosened the band around my ribs, but not the dread coiled deep in my sternum. By late morning, I had hit a larger town. Traffic, coffee shops, people walking dogs. The kind of ordinary sights that should have told me I was safe. They didn't, because at 11:22 a.m., while I was stopped at a red light, I glanced in the side mirror and froze. In the reflection, angled just right, I saw something standing on the sidewalk behind my car, too still, too rigid, staring directly toward me. A figure, tall, thin, shoulders wide, its face blocked by shadow from the awning overhead. It didn't move an inch, not even when people walked past it. When the light turned green, I drove without looking back. 2 blocks later, I checked again. Nothing there. Another mile. Another look. Nothing. By noon, I started convincing myself it had been a person. A normal person. My nerves inventing shapes where there were none. My imagination replaying the ridge's horrors in the wrong setting. I tried to breathe. Tried to calm the pounding in my chest. At 12:37 p.m., my car's low-fuel warning chimed. I pulled into another gas station, this one busy, full of noise and cars. Nothing solitary. Nothing quiet. I told myself it was fine. I stepped out to pump gas. The wind was normal. The air warm. People chatted, laughed, walked by without a care. I opened my door to grab my wallet and froze. It was sitting on my passenger seat. A small wooden figure, identical to the first 2. Same blank face. Same smooth edges. Same X carved into its chest. Except this one had something new. A second X, crossed over the first. Right below it, scratched faintly into the wood. 1/3. My stomach hollowed. My hands went numb. The figure hadn't been in the car when I left the first gas station. I was certain. I had checked the seats. I had checked the trunk. I had checked everything. Something had placed it there. I didn't pick it up. I didn't touch it. I reached for my wallet with trembling fingers, careful not to brush the figure. When I closed the door, I felt eyes on my back, but I didn't turn around. Not until I was back in the driver's seat. Lock door. Start engine. Don't look. Don't acknowledge. But I did. Just once. In the rearview mirror, a figure stood at the corner of the building. Still, silent, watching. And I knew, with perfect, sickening clarity, leaving the mountain wasn't the end. It was the first rule I'd broken. And whatever had taken interest in me now had a way to follow. And it had marked me. 1/3. One figure for each night it would need to reach me. One figure for each chance I'd get to stop it. Which meant something else. There would be a 2/3. And a 3/3. Unless I learned the rules I hadn't been given. Because the cabin rules were only for the mountain. But this was following me home.